Good morning, everybody, and happy Friday, and welcome to our coffee talk. Joining us today for this Ask Me Anything live stream is Mike Gribenow. Mike is a Rev Ops technology stack professional with over 11 years of experience helping some of the hottest brands such as Vidyard, Axonify, Opentext, Drift, and Litmus manage and track their funnel from lead capture through customer onboarding right through to renewals. Mike has joined up a wide variety of CRM, marketing automation, and sales enablement software tools. And I'm very grateful to have Mike here today with us to help answer some of your tech stack questions. So welcome, Mike.
Thanks, Norm. Glad to be here.
Happy to have you with us. So before we get started, just a little housekeeping. Thanks everyone for joining us online. This is an Ask Me Anything, so please use the live chat to give us a shout out and let us know where you hail from and the company you're with. And then use the live chat to ask your questions and add your comments. You'll need to be logged into your Google account, and you just need to create a quick YouTube profile in the live chat, but that's super easy and quick to do if you've never used the live chat before. So please, we encourage you to ask us lots of questions. So Mike, how you been keeping?
Doing pretty good. It's one thing to work from home, but it's another thing to not have the option to not do that. So adjusting to this new normal, but I think like everyone else, we're getting used to it pretty quickly and trying to get back into a productive workflow.
Yeah, productive workflow. I got to figure out a hair solution. This is just getting kind of crazy up here. I wore the headphones specifically today to keep the craziness down. But Mike, maybe we can kick things off with a question that I get asked a lot about. From a lot of business people now, and many of them have heard or know about revenue operations as a practice, but they're not exactly sure what areas of their organization revenue operations kind of connects with. So in your experience from the companies you've worked with, what roles do you see falling under that revenue operations umbrella?
So the highest level ones would be a connection to marketing, to sales, and to customer success. Those are kind of like the three main pillars that a RevOps team would connect to. Functionally, it's you're going to have a reporting capability. So someone in charge of collecting and presenting that data in a consumable way. Somebody who's process driven, that might even be split into two, one person being responsible for tools and another for designing process, but really that's one group together. And then now I'm forgetting my third pillar there on responsibility, but somebody who's really data focused and making sure that the database is going to be able to support both the process and the reporting going forward and actually delivering the information required to power the other two.
So it sounds like what you're saying is it's pretty much, is it all the roles that sort of touch the customer experience, from sort of that early stage lead flow all the way through to like renewals? Basically anyone who's in charge of, who has responsibility for those connections?
Yeah, and I guess traditionally in an organization, those might have been roles that were within each of those groups. Bringing it into a RevOps group means you're not having the people responsible for building and reporting on activity, reporting to the people that you're measuring at the same time. So RevOps kinds of amalgamates all those shared resources and makes one center of excellence, some people would say sometimes, but like a core group of experts that have a touch and visibility on the entire organization in terms of how it connects to customers and prospects.
Very cool. Is that, so I mean, coming from my agency days, you had kind of discrete like brand and comms teams, you had marketing teams that were, part of the lead generation process. You had sales teams who were getting leads and executing on leads and creating deals. You had onboarding. You had customer support or customer success. They're all now kind of under that revenue operations umbrella.
Yeah, not necessarily executing those touch points with the customer, but definitely having visibility on all those areas. So really understanding what are the functions those teams are trying to accomplish, and making sure that the information being used at each of those touch points is available. So, if you're thinking of that pass off to an implementations or customer success team, they need a certain set of information, and if that's not available at the time of handoff, then there's a lot of kind of rediscovery that needs to happen. So if you've got a Rev Ops team that has eyes on success, sales, and marketing, you can map out that journey and say, hey, someone's going to need this data point that's actually available at step 2. They need that at step 7. So if we can collect it at step 2, then there's not this recollection of information over and over again, which one helps build some trust with your prospects and customers, because it's clear that everyone in the organization understands your business and what you're trying to accomplish. And it also builds trust within the team, because there's not this, hand off, it's not my job anymore kind of situation. Everyone has what they need to accomplish their goals, and cuts down on run around and makes things much more efficient and smooth. So it makes everyone's life easier when you have a group of people who have visibility on all of those functions and can make sure that everyone's supporting each other properly.
Yeah, that makes sense. Does it change sort of the way the reporting responsibilities go? Does it change? Is there a single person who's kind of in charge of revenue operations that these things roll up to, or is it parallel? Kind of. What have you seen from your experience in terms of how that gets structured and how it's, I guess, led from an organization perspective?
Yeah, it's definitely it depends on the organization and the structure you have. The ones where I've seen it work best is where you have a RevOps team reporting to either a COO or like CFO function, so that there's no conflicts of interest in how that team might have to operate. I mean, just traditionally, you've got like a sales operations or marketing operations group within those teams, and you can quickly see how there's a conflict of interest there in if that team is metriced on something and the person responsible for reporting on that metric also is on that team. It can be difficult to get some trust to say, well, if your metric is leads and you're short on leads and your team's success is dependent on your number being higher than it actually is, then you can have some lack of trust in the reporting. So this group is separate and a little bit responsible to everyone, but not responsible to everyone. We want to support the organization. So having an honest and third-party Switzerland type view of how things are built and reported on helps everyone trust, because I'm not relying on you to tell me how well you're doing, but I'm also caring that your team is successful as well. So we're all working towards the same goal.
Everyone's kind of reporting on the same success criteria, and you're all kind of in the same boat together. It's no one team is faring better than the other. It's kind of a more level playing field.
Yeah, and there's also, part of the responsibility of this team of the RevOps team is to make sure everyone has a shared understanding of what success looks like. Mm-hmm. So, if you're building reports on marketing's production of leads, it's important that marketing and sales, because they're both going to be sharing leads, have a shared understanding of what a real lead is. So we don't, once it's passed between teams, the number and definitions don't change. Right. Everyone has a common understanding of what they're talking about in reality, so that there's no, okay, now it's come to me and I think a lead represents this, so you've actually given me less than what you're telling upper management. It's an important understanding that everyone has. So the shared expectations and understanding has everyone speaking the same language.
That's awesome. So I think you touched on this a little bit. There's a hint that there's kind of a workflow involved with that. You talked about people at step 7 needing information and assured that it's kind of collected at step 2, so you're not re-asking people for the same information. Can you describe or talk a little bit about what that sort of typical Rev Ops workflow could look like in an organization? And I know it's probably customized or specific to every one, but generally, is there like a sort of standard workflow that is used?
It's maybe a slight variation on the funnel model, but really the information is flowing from a marketing group, which is collecting responses to marketing actions. Are you signing up for a web form? Are you conducting a request to call for a call, demo request, those kinds of things? Anything that's a response to a campaign, you're collecting the information required for a sales qualification call. So there's a handoff there between the marketing team's activity generation and the qualification team, be it a BDR or an AE, who's going to accept that and validate that there is a potential business opportunity there. If you have a sort of qualification team in place, then there's an additional step of, after they've received it, they've done their qualification, you have to either discard it as not an opportunity, or progress it forward to passing towards an active sales opportunity. So then there's a handoff there between the qualification team and the AEs, and how that handoff is defined. And then finally, progression through the sales funnel, where additional information is captured. Who are the key stakeholders? What are the timelines, budgets? What are the pain points that need to be solved by your solution, whatever that might be? And then if there is a team responsible for delivering the product and solution, then there's a handoff to that team and what information they need to be able to actually execute on the purchase and maintain that customer for the future. And sharing the information between those teams really helps you, like we said, eliminate rediscovery, build trust, and then also speed to implementation is much faster if that team understands what the customer communicated during the sales cycle as the problems they need solved, and then lets you build from we've solved the issues that you had in place, and now here's the additional things you can do with our tool to make the rest of your business more successful.
So right through to the customer success and sort of ongoing revenue from that customer. That's amazing.
Yeah, and that's really the sales focused view of it. I mean, there's going to be touch points out into other teams as well. Finance is going to get involved on collections and those kinds of things. But that's really the initial hand raise to closed won business and ongoing work that people typically think of in the Rev Ops process there.
It strikes me it's a really data intensive process. There's a lot of information that's collected and shared about the customer's experience as they kind of move through that workflow. So what would some of the key technologies be that kind of underpin that revenue operations workflow or that framework?
Yeah, I mean, everyone's probably heard this. I mean, it's almost table stakes and people forget about it. But a solid CRM is the basis of the RevOps team's framework. You probably want to include a secondary data processing tool. Like, I mean, as silly as it is, I've never seen Excel not used. Let's put it that way. But if you get into a BI tool, a separate data warehouse for collecting and combining information, if there's multiple tools involved that don't connect in the CRM, that's another one. Definitely you start branching out when you're getting marketing involved. The tools marketing uses to execute on campaigns, is going to be wide and varied. I mean, there's definitely marketing automation platform for a lot of organizations, at least an email tool involved there, but typically marketing automation. But then you get into conversational marketing with chat tools, some sort of display ad and social tools involved in there. It really depends on your organization and how you communicate with your audience. But I mean, I think there's something like more than 5,000 tools on the marketing landscape now. If you're looking at that most recent infographic, and further down the funnel, when you're closing out sales, there's going to be something related to customer success. You might be building that yourself on top of your CRM, but you could also pull in a success tool like Gainsight into that mix, depending on the complexity of your sales structure as well. There could be other tools in terms of combining data from third-party services, really specialized reporting and collection tools somewhere in there. If you're a SaaS product, hopefully some connection into usage statistics that could be feeding your marketing team, or a customer success tool as well. So it's pretty broad, but the main ones would be definitely a marketing automation tool of some sort and a CRM.
Sorry, did I hear you say 5,000 pieces of possible software? Is that what the landscape can encompass?
In the absence of having that infographic, like, it was recently updated, so you can't even read the chart anymore. Now they're just kind of combining them into blobs of function. So like, you need a magnifying glass and a really high res version of that PDF to actually zoom in and see the specific players. But yeah, it's a huge array of tools that are available, and there's ones that are trying to fill all your needs, and then there's the really point solutions that solve a specific problem. So how many tools a Rev Ops team uses, it really depends on the organization. I think the average, the last time I heard a metric thrown out there, was 40 tools. And now it's like one of those things where there's ongoing projects to try and pare down how many tools are being used, because there's just too many to keep track of. Like, it's a balance of, do I have technology that meets my needs, and then do I have too much technology now, I guess is the struggle that a lot of organizations are getting into.
Right. Do you find, I mean, I always thought it would be, you have to have the right balance of good messaging and good content, and then tools to kind of make that system work. And I was just, as you were talking, I was thinking about another question I get asked a lot. I'm not a CRM expert, but I don't know why people ask me. I think there's this thought that inevitably, as your business grows, you're going to end up on some kind of enterprise class CRM, like, let's call it Salesforce. I mean, I think that's what most people immediately think of when they think of CRM. And so the question I get asked, and I don't really have a good answer for it, is that if they ask if I'm inevitably going to end up on an enterprise CRM system like a Salesforce, even as a small or growing organization, should I just bite the bullet now and start on that, or does it make sense to use something else that maybe is one of those sort of more products focused on the size of business I am right now, and what's involved? Like, can I migrate to something like Salesforce later on, or is it better to kind of just start there? Any thoughts on that?
I'm definitely biased because I'm a Salesforce fanboy for sure. So I'll preface the answer with that. But I've heard the analogy of building the car as you're driving it is something that people want to do. That's one thing. You can always add features as you go, but completely switching cars while driving is difficult for sure. I've heard that get something that solves your problems today and we can fix tomorrow is an approach and perhaps a cost-effective approach for expenses today. But if you have the budget available I would invest more in a more expensive tool if you think that's what you're going to need in the future. Because as organizations scale, like the goal is scale and scale quickly, the work doesn't become less in the future. So if you're adding a huge project like migration to a new system on top of increasing workloads that are coming with scale, it's going to be much easier to bite the bullet on, spend another $20, $30 on a license today, and then you have the framework in place that you can build on in the future for a tool that's going to meet your needs. Switching tools and rebuilding what is in place at the time of switch to a new tool is so much more work than people expect. So I would personally avoid that if at all possible. I'm definitely sensitive to budget constraints and things like that as well, but you're going to be spending more on consultants or headcount to have the bandwidth to do that project as well as continue operations while that project's ongoing in the future than if potentially you did that day one if you had a little bit more investment in a tool earlier days.
Makes sense.
Yeah. If you're processing, like for example, if you're in launch phase and you're processing 100 leads a month, the risk at taking some time now to switch is much less than if you're processing 1,000 leads a month or 1,000 leads a day. That kind of scale in flight while making a switch is going to be much more difficult.
Yeah, that's a really great point. Never thought about that. Yeah.
I'm not saying it's not possible. It's just so much more difficult, and it makes continuing to the next step of that scale later on, while you're kind of stumbling, so much more risky than in a small scale stage earlier on.
And do you feel like there's any? Obviously, Salesforce is a huge ecosystem. And even things like HubSpot, they have their own ecosystems. Do you find there's advantages or disadvantages of being kind of inside an ecosystem, or is the flexibility of being able to kind of glue different pieces of the stack together using different providers, or are there advantages to that? Any thoughts on, whether being in one ecosystem is advantageous over kind of putting your own stack together?
Being in an ecosystem definitely makes it easier to scale quicker. You're going to have a larger talent pool to draw from. The number of people who are Salesforce experts or HubSpot experts are kind of clustered. So if you need one of those people, there's more people to reach out to. There's a lot of talent out there in development, but typically they're building their own product. They're busy already. So building product for yourself is difficult. It's much easier to leverage something that's pre-built. And being within an ecosystem, you kind of have tools behaving similarly. So you have an understanding of how an integration is going to behave when it's put in place. So you can, one, validate that it behaves like other tools, and then make your changes to massage it into the existing workflow a little more seamlessly than if you had to custom build something yourself.
Yeah, that makes sense. What I hear about customer databases or data lakes kind of sometimes running in parallel to things like a CRM system. Is that only in the realm of super big companies that create these data lakes? What is that? Is there an advantage to that, or why do people do that?
Maybe expand on that a little bit. I'm not 100% sure I get what you're saying.
I think just what I've heard of is people saying, okay, well, the CRM is going to house this data, but our kind of main source of truth for data will be this database, sort of, an AWS database or some other kind of database. So it kind of runs in parallel to a CRM system, but they use that as kind of a data lake of all the data that they collect. Have you heard of?
I mean, there's always going to be a disconnect on some tool in use. Like my analogy there is visitor information to a website. There's always a section of your visitors that you won't know anything about. people clear cookies, so you lose tracking to connect to their old history, that kind of stuff. There's always going to be a little bit of information you don't have. Intentionally segregating it, I would avoid doing as much as possible, because then you have an internal person who controls the information that somebody else might need. It's better to share as much as possible so everyone has access to the same information to make decisions. Maybe that's not true for certain pieces, like billing information, that kind of stuff, but contact information, usage data, like, this is all things that is valuable to a number of people. And if you're creating this lack of access, then that information either isn't being referenced to make good decisions, or people stop trying to get access to it because there's a hassle in terms of sourcing it. So, I lean towards the more transparency, the better, because then there's no excuses for someone not having the information they need when it exists. But I guess the specifics of the scenario you're talking about, we'd need to dig into a little bit more to comment on it.
Yeah, and I don't know enough about it to give you that. Good. Another question that's come up before, I think, is when you have access to all this data, is there a way to kind of, like, how do you focus your sales teams on focus their efforts on opportunities with the highest likelihood of converting to sales? And I guess maybe even more importantly, because if you have a whole bunch of leads, how do you surface the ones that are the best ones, and which are likely to be not just convert to sales, but will become great customers for your organization? Is there a methodology to that?
Some of the common ones are definitely like lead scoring is a traditional one. I get a little bit nervous about how much people dive into that. Like, it's great if you have enough data to do some clustering of the types of people who are likely to convert. The problem is that if you operationalize that too much and say only talk to these people, then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So I would say follow up with all interest that's incoming, because then you've got this somewhat fluid definition of what a good customer is going to be, because you are still addressing everyone and giving everyone a chance to become a customer. But based on some historical data, you do want to say, if you have bandwidth to respond to 500 things and you have 1,000 things to respond to, focus on the 500 that are more likely to convert based on that historical window of data. But you do want to, when you have bandwidth, dig into the rest of it so that you are still validating that your previous assumptions about what a good prospect looks like is still true, because maybe you're using that assumption or that previous history to only target areas and missing opportunity in the future. So, always process everything if possible, because you might stumble upon a new market you hadn't previously looked at because you didn't think it was relevant, and the market's now telling you, hey, I like your tool. Or you might be focusing on something that the market's like that segment's interest in what you do is waning, and because you think that they're the best fit, you're focusing on an area where there's dwindling opportunity, and you're missing areas that are growing. So I would time focus a little bit how far back you go to measure, and then still address everything, but you can use that to prioritize, but never ignore something that has a low score because maybe your score methodology is no longer relevant. So that's the way I would address that. People treat it like a magic wand. It's not a magic wand. It's a data point to help you make a better decision. But I mean, evidence changes over time sometimes, and as new data becomes available, you need to modify your thinking.
And then change your lead scoring model accordingly if it requires changing. And I think what's interesting about that is, obviously right now we're in pretty challenging times, and I don't imagine the way deals would normally progress are progressing that way right now. So that sense of being able to adjust fluidly to different situations must be really good to have right now. Are there other things that people in RevOps roles should be thinking about in terms of evaluating, the revenue pipeline and how they're managing communications through this period specifically?
Yeah, I mean, focusing on the stuff that's critical to your business right now is definitely an area you want to double down on. What are the things that you do that make you successful? Focus on making sure those are still successful. You mentioned communications. I would definitely, if you have automated nurtures or automated responders out there in the world, go and review that content, because it may have been a while since you've done that, and make sure that it's sensitive to the situation that's happening right now. If you're a brand that uses humor, you might want to make sure that humor isn't insensitive or something along those lines. Make sure it's still fit to be deployed at this time. If you have availability, like this is all dependent on your situation. You might have availability to do that review. If you needed to do that review, that means you didn't have it documented. If you have now bandwidth because the amount of work that you're doing has diminished a bit, maybe this is the time to do the documentation, because later on when work picks up again, you're not going to have that time either. Conversely, there are industries where you're 10 times as busy as you were 6 months ago. So that might not fit, but tactically for sure, go check everything that happens automatically. If you've got chatbot scripts, review those scripts and make sure there's still something you're comfortable being communicated. And then, maybe go disable some nurtures, because there's so much communication out there that a normal drip might not be what you want to do. Go put things on pause if you just want to give people some breathing room to process the new normal, I guess is what I'm saying there. And reassess cadences too. Like we've all seen the rise of sales automation tools like SalesLoft and Outreach. There's going to be a lot more early rejection of leads, I would say now. Like, budgets being frozen is a real thing, and the number of times you message that contact isn't going to change availability of money. So maybe be more open to, if someone's saying, give me 6 months because I have a budget freeze right now, maybe don't push back on that as much as you would have historically, because that's a real thing right now. So give them the time, because nobody likes being annoyed when they're stressed, and that's more quickly likely to get someone to turn on your brand and your team than historically, where it was kind of just understood that someone's going to keep reaching out until they get through the cadence. Yeah, these are all things that, like, really it comes down to, if you were receiving this activity, how would you feel about it? Keep that in mind while you're designing it. Everyone has real goals they're trying to achieve, real quotas they need to meet, but spending time hitting the same people over and over again when there is no sale going to be happening is just making things harder on yourself, when you could be taking a more thoughtful approach, or reaching out to new segments that you haven't been attacking in the past, because people are now able to say no sooner.
Right. Yeah, and actually, you made a really good point earlier when you said, if you have been going strong and hitting things really hard, and maybe you haven't had a chance to document some of your processes, or sharpen the axe, while some of those deals are maybe just on pause, it's a good time to kind of go back and tidy up some of that. Look, build your DNA a little bit for the future. Yeah, that's a really good point.
And if there's any of my former coworkers out there actually watching this, I can feel them laughing at me, because everyone knows that I hate writing it down, because as soon as you write it down, it's out of date. But the reality is there. I mean, it helps the next person to have to have a map to what you built. So it makes sense to do it if you can. I typically like to look at it as, if you know the tool well enough, you know where to look to figure it out. Because if you wrote something down 6 months ago, there's probably been a lot of change over that 6 months, and now if you go back to that map, it's no longer relevant and won't really help or take someone down the wrong path. But it definitely helps to have a generalized idea of how things should be working.
Yeah, very cool. Just checking the comments here. Had one comment, not really a question. I'll just pop it up on screen. Yeah, I actually saw the thank you for the comment. I saw it's Chief Martech, I think is the person. I can't remember his name, but he publishes every year. He publishes that the Martech landscape, and I saw this year it's gone away from like interconnected pieces of software to just huge blobs of different kinds of, and I thought the number was something like 8,000, and I was just like, how does anyone actually thanks for this comment too, by the way, it's appreciated. How does anyone starting out in this in a procurement fashion, like, actually get their heads around this in terms of where do you, like, how many pieces of software do you have to evaluate to kind of get your head around these different elements? And I mean, there's one for each role, but there's probably 200 or 300 different options in that. What's any advice on kind of what's the good approach to starting to, sift through that huge number of pieces of software?
Yeah, you kind of need to dive in. There's not any great way about it. I like to do I'll take a demo from pretty much anybody, to be honest. I like to learn what each of the tools can do, just so I have that in the back of my head when I'm starting to do an evaluation. It's like, okay, here's the problem my business is experiencing. Here is the ecosystem of the tools that I'm familiar with in my head that I can use to address that problem. And then I'll start saying to my network to say, anyone else who's had this problem or worked with these tools, what have you used? Is how I, as a Rev Ops person, would approach that situation. From a procurement standpoint, yeah, it's definitely tough. You're not just going to say, where's the phone book of people that fix this problem, and now I'm going to look through everything. It's tough. For me, the questions I typically answer are, does this thing connect into my current ecosystem of tools? Like, if I'm using Salesforce, does it connect to Salesforce natively? Because that will make my life a lot easier. If there's a third-party integration, what is that integration? Like, a lot of tools will list a Salesforce integration, but it turns out to be a tool like Zapier that connects to it, and that changes things a little bit. And how well does it solve the problem that the business is experiencing? So if you have a really quickly operating team, then you're looking at, say, a data solution. How quickly can the data get in front of your team so that they can make their decisions is going to be a factor. If you have that, like, if that team is responding to inbound, they need it quickly so that they can reply to the inbound request with as much information as possible. If there is a 1 day data append, then that tool might not be great for the team that's doing quick responses. But if you have an outbound mostly team, they'll build a list and be responding to things over time. Maybe a day to have better information that takes longer to get is okay, because you don't have an immediate response to get back to. What a tool says it can do is important. What a tool, or how a tool does what it says it can do, is just as important. So these are all factors you need to think about when trying to pick something that's going to be part of your tech stack.
Is there is there a kind of Swiss Army knife tool that you kind of always rely on? I don't know if the analogy even works there. In my world, I have a few things I call Swiss Army knife, because it doesn't matter what job I'm on, I always bring those to the job, and I often end up using them for something. Is there an analogy like that in your world?
I would probably say each category of tools, I have something that I like. One solve everything tool. I wouldn't say I have a one solve everything tool. Um, I try as much as possible to do as much data processing in CRM or one tool connected to CRM, just because uh, you know you might have a tool today that is perfect, but next year might no longer be the right tool, and you need to swap it out. So if you think of the buyer's journey, I guess we were talking about there, how things enter the funnel, move through the funnel, and then are completing. That's kind of a linear chain way of thinking. And if you're pulling the third link in the chain out, you need to replace that. Does the things upstream still connect to the new thing you're swapping in and out? It's tough. So to make things a little bit easier, I try to do a lot of my my data processing. We talked about lead scoring, do lead scoring. I try to do all of those types of things directly in the CRM, so that if I need to pull something out before or after that linear progression, it's easier to do because I don't have to rebuild everything upstream from it as well. That's people talk about the stickiness of a solution. That's great as a selling point, but as a person who's using a tool, if for some reason you're losing that tool, then you need to do that work to rebuild everything. So minimizing the amount of rebuild in the future as you swap things in and out is a consideration that I definitely have now after doing this for 10 years.
Yeah, that's great advice. There was something you were just talking about there that made me think of another question, but now I've forgotten it. It's Friday.
Yeah.
This is coffee, by the way.
Okay.
Just checking to see if we don't have any questions from the audience. So, yeah. Is there, this is not a world I'm familiar with. So is there something advice-wise you would kind of say, look, if you're thinking about Rev Ops, I don't know, any kind of sort of sage wisdom that you would give people kind of getting into this or starting down this path, that from your experience you see, if you don't think about this kind of early in that journey, it's going to come back and bite you in the ass later on. This has bit me in the past where I don't ask why enough. A lot of people will say, ask why as a way to get someone to qualify a little bit the problem that they're experiencing when making a request for a process change. Sometimes that turns into prove to me that the problem you're trying to solve is a real problem that needs to get solved. I don't like to take that approach to it. It's like someone's asking for something because they feel pain, and as a team, you want to make everyone else's lives a little bit easier, because the less time you feel anxiety or frustration with how you do your job, the more time you spend responding to prospects in a timely manner, customers in a timely manner. You provide a better service that way because you're not fighting with completing the administrative components of your job. But definitely ask why from a better understanding of the problem perspective, because someone might say, I need help with a lead scoring program, but like, why do they need help with a lead scoring program? What is the thing that not having lead scoring is causing issues for them? A lot of times, people will phrase things in a way of, can you do this? Can you just build me this? And it does exactly this. There could be other methods to solve that problem that already exist they're just not aware of. So understanding what they're actually trying to solve, like I need a better way to
match a lead to an existing account. What is having a lead disconnected from the account causing you pain wise, so that I make sure that when we bring a solution to you, it actually solves the problem you were trying to solve, as opposed to just there are things disconnected. These are ideas that I would say is a better way to frame the ask why, because when you say ask why, people hear, I don't believe the problem you have is a real problem, as opposed to let's work together to make a solution that works for everyone.
Very cool. I remembered the question as you were talking
Okay.
about there. I hear a lot about amount of duplication of data inside a CRM system. So a lead comes in, it already exists as a contact somewhere else, and then it's, for some reason, it's creating, you have basically two contacts, or you have duplication of data. Is there an easy, how do you deal with deduping data and keeping the data clean inside a CRM?
Mm-hmm. So there are a lot of solutions out there to identify and clean up your database of duplicates. I love but get nervous when we start talking about having that happen programmatically on the background, because anyone who's worked with a marketing database before has seen keyboard mashes on a form fill. So first you need to figure out where the cleanest data is likely to reside, or at least the least bad data. For example, when you're setting up your deduplication rules, if you're going to have them run automatically in the background without someone validating, figure out of the data, the duplicates existing in your system, which one is the best version of that data, and make sure your rule will always pick the best version. I would argue that typically it's, with the exception of a title data point, probably the oldest record in your database, because that's the one that's been touched the most by the sales team manually verifying that information. When in doubt, I'd rather a duplicate be created than not created, just because a lot of processes are set up to bubble up the most recent information to a person to work with first. So if we present a duplicate, say this, find a way to make it clear that there is a potential duplicate so that people will check that information, but don't stop it from being created, because then you might miss out on something. That's one of the things I've definitely learned from that discussion. Like we were talking previously, how all these tools connect together. There are times where a tool just won't perfectly fit into an existing process that will clean everything on its way through. So you need to allow that fringe case to still happen. So you need to build that into the people process of, this has made it past the rules that prevent bad data. We think it could be bad. Please validate that it is bad or good, and then do your cleaning from there.
A little bit of human oversight.
Yeah. I think it's one of those things where AI is going to change the world in the future, but we're not there yet. And I would rather a person make a intentional decision to leave junk, as opposed to clean up junk and destroy something that someone might have needed.
Right. That's smart. Cool. Well, you touched on something earlier when we were talking about that landscape and the thousands of solutions that are out there. You mentioned your peer networks. Any, in this region, for people who are marketing automation, revenue operations, are there any good resources in terms of peer networks that you can think of offhand?
The easiest to find people would definitely be LinkedIn, but we're all a little bit probably exhausted from random reach outs, because you kind of have a assumption that it's a salesperson trying to sell you something, not necessarily a person trying to have a meaningful conversation. But when the world goes back to normal, attend networking events, meet people, shake hands. Um, Maybe not in the future anymore, but you know what I mean. Like make those connections. Uh, offer up as much, offer help as much as you ask for help. I would say. You know, if you join a Slack community or a LinkedIn group or anywhere where there's a discussion where someone is saying, "Here's a problem I'm having." If you've experienced that problem, offer up what you did to fix a solution. It might not be the thing that they need, but it might, you know, start them down the path of fixing of designing a solution that works for them. And like, you know, an offhand comment that you make might be the thing that triggers something in them building something amazing, and then they'll share that back to you, hopefully, and you'll be like, oh, I never thought of it that way, and that might in turn help you make your processes better. It's kind of like a group think situation. You know, find people you trust, keep in touch. You know, it takes effort to keep relationships alive, and the value is definitely there if you put that effort in.
And I would think experience is an essential part of any of that kind of decision making on something. As if you read all the glossy marketing material about what these tools can do, they all sound amazing. It's, you know, what does it actually do on the back end, and can you actually make it work? So experience, I think, would be a huge part of being successful at sort of evaluating those kinds of things. And I just, with that many tools out there, I don't think any one person is going to have experience with everything. So drawing on that community would be essential.
And that's not to say that just because a tool behaves slightly differently than what, you know, a white paper might say. As long as you go in armed with knowledge of what is going to happen, you can plan for that and not be surprised post-launch. You can design for that ahead of time. So if someone says, you know, I'm thinking of using this tool, and you throw up a couple, hey, here's some things that I experienced while using that tool, they can plan ahead for that and avoid those roadblocks. And, you know, helps them better their career, helps you, because someone else is going to share that information back and forth. Like no one wants to mop up after the fact with a failed launch kind of thing.
Yeah. Awesome. So no questions from the audience. I'm really thankful that you shared your time with us today and did this chat. Quick, you have foam around you in a serious podcasting microphone. Is that do you have a podcast?
I a couple times was trying to launch one, I guess. I recorded a number of episodes but never actually released them. And it's worked out great for this new work from home world that we're in right now in terms of having some decent audio quality. Like we're talking there for a minute about building the network and sharing with your friends. It's definitely something that I think I was starting to realize is that when you have a podcast where you're talking about a specific solution, the number of people with the exact same tech stack that you have and the exact same issue in their business isn't as big as you think it might be. So like a discussion like what we're having right now is much more appealing to a broader audience. But like what I was attempting to do there was probably a lot more focused, and maybe like a sliver of audience would have actually found valuable. So that's where like that aggregate large community discussion I find to be so much more valuable. Like here's my specific issue with the specific tools I have in place, who can help me figure this out, to be much better than, you know, let's record some long form content that, you know, somebody is going to find valuable. A very small group of people for a limited segment of time was maybe not the appropriate format to get that out. But I mean, I like tools, I like technology, and so now I have all these cool toys to play with on a regular basis.
Well, it's certainly been awesome for this. Actually, I guess my brother has joined, and he likes your soundproofing, and he says I need to get on that. That's my brother. Thanks, Sean. Oh my gosh. Okay, Mike, I'll let you go. Thanks again for your time. It was great having you on, and that was a really great discussion. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Norm. It was fun.
Okay. Talk to you later.